5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The subcommittee is now in order. Welcome, everyone, to our hearing on the U.S. Senate Space and Science Subcommittee. Thank you to each of our witnesses for their participation today. Thanks to our subcommittee Ranking Member Schmidt for working with me on these issues, and to Chair Cantwell and Ranking Member Cruz for their collaboration. A thriving commercial space industry is essential for continued American leadership of space innovation, which in turn advances critical economic, national security, and scientific interests. The new space economy presents exciting opportunities where visiting, living, and working in space can become reality. I am proud that America is leading these global efforts to safely advance the technology that enables space exploration, including human spaceflight. I'm also proud to see my home state of Arizona leading the way in commercial space. Arizona is a shining example of how to build meaningful careers and innovations in the new space economy, thanks to public-private partnerships at Arizona State University and University of Arizona, as well as the investments from innovative companies to produce space vehicles and conduct research across the state. To keep America on top, we must foster an environment that enables and encourages innovation without sacrificing safety. This will require Congress to streamline authorization processes, enable a workable safety framework for in-space operations, and clearly define proper responsibilities for different government agencies. In October, this subcommittee heard from leading industry representatives and experts on the current regulatory environment and how it could be improved. Witnesses all emphasized the need to address mission authorization, the learning period, and other pressing matters while looking ahead to a future with unknown capabilities. The time for action is now. Competitor nations, including adversaries like Russia and China, are making major space investments. It's imperative that a U.S. framework establishes the norms for a workable international business climate, promotes our national interests, and serves as the models for others to follow. Commercial space companies are working right now to provide orbital and satellite services, mitigate orbital debris, manufacture in space, deliver space tourism, and so much more. The question of how regulation of these new space activities will work, often referred to as mission authorization, remains unclear, even as businesses and NASA press for a clear and efficient authorization framework. The White House National Space Council released draft legislation in November to extend existing responsibilities of the Departments of Transportation and Commerce while dividing mission authorization authority between them. I am heartened that the administration is working on this critical issue, but the proposal contains numerous ambiguities, new undefined terms, and broad grants of open-ended authority. Unfortunately, the Council declined to attend today's hearing and answer questions on their proposal, but I hope to hear from them soon and gain further clarity in future discussions. One thing that is clear is that we cannot simply continue with the status quo that results in licensing delays, regulatory uncertainty, and inefficient uses of taxpayer dollars and private resources. The proper regulatory framework will both remove unnecessary burdens and provide the necessary certainty for the space industry to prosper safely now and into the future. For this to happen, we must keep mission authorization fully distinct from mission success. The government's job here is to allow innovation, investment, and dreams to flourish while ensuring safety. We need a framework that relies on our greatest asset, our people, to push both industry and the country forward. To succeed, we'll need a robust workforce equipped to support the commercial space ecosystem. I'm passionate about making sure that Americans and Arizonans have rewarding careers to choose from when graduating either from a certificate program, vocational school, or with advanced degrees. Encouraging public-private partnerships and leveraging the existing expertise of entities like NASA will be essential to ensure we have the engineers, technical experts, and skilled workforce to win the next century in space. As I said in October, Congress must take the same enterprising, pioneering approach to commercial space that has served us so well in earlier generations. I believe this requires a flexible regulatory environment able to attack the issues of today head-on without compromising adaptability to the issues of tomorrow. Thank you. I'll now turn to Ranking Member Schmidt for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for working so diligently and with me on these important issues. Thank you to our witnesses. for joining us here today. While we may not agree on everything that's discussed here today, your agencies have been and will continue to be invaluable to our space efforts. As I've stated before, Missouri has blazed a trail in our nation's path of exploration. St. Charles, Missouri marked the beginning of Lewis and Clark's expedition to explore our nation's expansion to the west. And Marshfield, Missouri produced Edwin Hubble, who fathered our nation's exploration of distant galaxies. Today, Missouri is home to over 54 companies who supply our nation's civil and commercial space missions. Space has been a unifying force for our nation, dating back to the space race with Russia in the 1950s and the 1960s. Then our nation rallied to meet the challenge of beating Russia to the moon, culminating in Neil Armstrong's famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Today, America is engaged in a new 21st century space race, one in which we compete with China. Once again, we face the challenge of landing on the lunar surface before China has the chance to plant its flag on the moon, claiming it is their domain. Fortunately, America has the pieces in place from an industry perspective to win this important challenge. However, regulatory ambiguity and uncertainty are standing in the way from truly unleashing our nation's commercial aerospace industry capabilities. In the intensifying space race with China, retaining U.S. leadership is imperative, not just for economic and security interests, but to ensure all nations follow appropriate rules and norms in space. As we contemplate new frameworks for space regulation, our policies must balance enabling the deployment of new technologies for commercial operations while ensuring safety, while sustaining our role as the preeminent leader in space. Currently, there are 4 key agencies who exercise authority or jurisdiction over space: the FCC, the Department of Transportation's Federal Aviation Administration Office of Commercial Space Transportation, AST. I was just going to give acronyms: NASA and NMFS. It plays a small role, but for whatever reason, it is in our nation's space endeavors. At today's hearing, we're examining the role of some of these agencies responsible for whether or not their roles need to be refocused or changed to meet the demands of our nation's rapidly evolving commercial space industry. I've already helped lead those efforts along with Senator Sinema and others here in the Senate, and Senator Hickenlooper, who's here, with the Launch Communications Act, which streamlines the FCC's commercial launch and reentry spectrum licensing process to provide a more certain and timely licensing process to keep pace with the launch and reentry demands at the commercial space industry. That bill has passed the Senate and look forward to working with the House to get it signed into law. Recently, in an attempt to address current regulatory uncertainty and confusion as relates to our federal policies for new and novel in-space activity known as mission authorization, the Biden administration released a proposal that would divide responsibilities between the Departments of Transportation and Commerce. Despite being met with opposition, the White House in a statement said the proposal ensures that our government will build a regulatory environment that supports commercial expansion to benefit all Americans. I will make mention that the National Space Council, which authored the administration's proposal, was invited to today's hearing and is noticeably absent. It's disappointing they're not here to answer simple questions. Madam Chair, it is important that our industry has regulatory clarity and certainty as we focus our efforts here in this committee on a commercial space bill. As we embark on this new frontier of space exploration, the stakes are profound. We must make the hard decisions, which may include creating new authorities for some agencies and reforming or eliminating authorities for others. Just as our nation did as Sputnik and Soviets cast a dark shadow upon the Earth in 1957, we must meet this moment. I stand ready to work with you and to bring forward balanced, light touch policies that empower, not hinder, American ingenuity and innovation and get the government out of the way. I'm eager to hear from our witnesses today to assist this committee in shaping the policies that retains America's primacy in space. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Now I'll introduce our witnesses for today's hearing. Our first witness is NASA Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy. Ms. Melroy has logged more than 924 hours in space, is one of only 2 women to ever command a space shuttle, and flew more than 6,000 hours during her Air Force service. She's also served in leadership roles at Lockheed Martin, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Defense Advanced Research Projects. Deputy Administrator Melroy, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chair Cantwell, Chair Sinema, Ranking Member Cruz, and Ranking Member Schmidt, I am extremely pleased to be here and have the opportunity to appear today on what is a critically important topic. This is a really exciting time for space. There is a lot going on, especially in commercial space, which is playing an increasingly important role in NASA's amazing mission to conduct meaningful scientific investigations throughout the universe. We're working to return humans to the moon under the Artemis program, and then pressing forward for the first humans on Mars. We're unlocking the secrets of the universe with the James Webb Space Telescope. And our vision for NASA is that we take on the hardest and most complex challenges that no one else can do. At the same time, where industry is ready, we are increasingly transitioning to commercially provided services where it makes sense. And let me give you a few examples. When NASA decided to retire the space shuttle, we needed a new way to transport astronauts and cargo, including critical science, to the International Space Station. And working with Congress, the agency funded and authorized the development of new commercial space launch capabilities and spacecraft capable of carrying humans. Under this model, NASA and one of our commercial providers, SpaceX, we together have launched 8 crews to the space station from American soil. And SpaceX has launched 3 additional private human spaceflight missions, opening the door to a new private commercial human spaceflight market. And all of these launches are commercially licensed by our colleagues at the FAA. As NASA looks to the future, we plan to build upon the success of commercial crew and cargo and leverage the tremendous progress of the commercial space industry. We're very excited. We expect the first 2 robotic commercial lunar landers under NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services to launch in January, delivering critical science and technology payloads to the lunar surface. NASA is just one of many customers for these commercial lunar landings. And by the end of the decade, commercial space stations will be on orbit, hosting both NASA astronauts and other private activities. As NASA acquires more of these commercial space services to accomplish our mission, the agency's success is inextricably linked to the success of a commercial space industry. And we did this by design. We did it by intent. Over the years, NASA has strategically fostered the growth of the commercial space industry, which has increased competition, lowered costs, and accelerated innovation in the market. Our commercial space industry is the envy of the world. However, this innovation does raise important questions about who will authorize and supervise commercial space activities. We have to balance that amazing innovation and economic growth with protecting the space environment for coexisting users like NASA, government activities, and for future use, foreign policy considerations, and of course, national security concerns. So as NASA is increasingly a customer of commercial services, we really need greater clarity regarding who is responsible for authorizing and supervising commercial space activities. This clarity is vital for our mission success. That's why NASA is pleased that the National Space Council recently put forth a recommendation to Congress to make a logical extension of the authorities of the Department of Commerce and Transportation to better enable the authorization and continuing supervision of commercial space activities. Important things such as orbital debris mitigation, space-based manufacturing, commercial human spaceflight, and the recovery and use of space resources. This proposal gives industry a clear path to provide on-orbit services to NASA and other customers while protecting against interference with the government's own missions and interests, while ensuring also that space continues to be a safe place for all operators. The intent of this supervision is not to stifle or slow down industry, but rather to work with industry in advancing commercial space. The space industry needs a clear, predictable, timely, and flexible process to initiate non-governmental space activities safely and successfully. I look forward to the opportunity to continue to discuss this important and exciting topic and answer any of your questions.
Great. Thank you so much. Our second witness is Kelvin Coleman, the Federal Aviation Administration's Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation. Mr. Coleman has more than 25 years of experience at the FAA and formerly worked for the U.S. Naval Air Systems Command. Associate Administrator Coleman, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chair Cantwell, Chair Sinema, Ranking Member Schmidt, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to be here today to discuss the important topic of promoting safety and innovation in the new space economy. The success of the U.S. commercial space industry is critical to our nation. Likewise, clear, predictable, transparent, and right-sized regulation of U.S. commercial space is also critical for U.S. continued leadership in space. The Department of Transportation and the FAA are strongly committed to enabling safe U.S. commercial space activities in a manner consistent with our nation's priorities. This is why the Department of Transportation and the FAA unequivocally stand in support of the administration's proposal regarding mission authorization and supervision of novel commercial space activities that puts forward a clear and predictable oversight framework that will impose minimal regulatory burdens on U.S. private sector actors in space. The proposal features a clear delineation of regulatory oversight roles and responsibilities that smartly leverage existing U.S. departmental authorities and expertise. Specifically, the proposal logically extends the Department of Transportation's existing human spaceflight responsibilities to include human spaceflight activities in space. This will ensure consistent, single-agency oversight of human spaceflight activities throughout a mission's full life cycle from launch all the way through reentry. Further, the proposal gives recognition to commercial in-space transportation and appropriately assigns responsibility for this very specific grouping of activities to the Department of Transportation, which currently oversees U.S. private sector transportation operations to and from space. Regulatory oversight clarity and process efficiency are important benefits garnered from this very common sense oversight construct. Over the last several months, we, together with our interagency partners, have worked tirelessly and given careful and thoughtful consideration to the needs of U.S. private sector and U.S. government operators in space while crafting this important proposal. We are steadfastly committed to continued close collaboration with the Department of Commerce, NASA, the Department of Defense, and other agencies to collectively ensure the application of consistent standards in promoting safe and sustainable novel space activities. Since September of last year, I have been privileged to lead the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation, which carries out the Department of Transportation's statutory responsibility to regulate U.S. launch and reentry and U.S. launch and reentry site operations only to the extent necessary to protect the public health and safety, safety of property, and national security and foreign policy interests of the United States. Overall, we've licensed nearly 700 commercial launch and reentry operations and 14 non-federal spaceports, more than any other country in the world by far in both categories. Safety is the FAA's North Star, and we are proud of the fact that no FAA licensed launch or reentry operation has resulted in a fatality or injury to a member of the public or caused significant public property damage. In recent years, we've witnessed the pace and growth of U.S. commercial launch and reentry operations increase significantly, along with the commensurate increase in demand for my office's licensing products and safety services. Looking forward, In order to maintain safety while keeping pace with industry, we will remain reliant on the incredible work of a fully staffed Office of Commercial Space Transportation team. I am happy to mention that with Congress's support, we raised our total staff size to 147 with the addition of 33 new staff members last fiscal year. My office also remains extremely focused on implementation of the streamlined Launch and Reentry Regulation, Part 450, which is performance-based and allows for the obtaining of a single license for a portfolio of operations from multiple sites. To facilitate industry transition to Part 450, we provided to industry an assortment of aids, including license applications checklist, advisory circulars, as well as virtual tutorials and workshops. I remain very confident that Part 450 offers a step in the right direction towards efficiency and workload reductions for both the government and industry without sacrificing safety. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Our next witness is Richard Dalbello. Mr. Dalbello serves as the Director of the Commerce Department's Office of Space Commerce. Prior to this role, he spent time as Virgin Galactic's Vice President of Global Engagement and in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Director Dalbello, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairs Cantwell and Sinema, Ranking Member Schmidt, Senator Hickenlooper, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My office, the Office of Space Commerce, or OSC, along with our colleagues in NOAA and the Department of Commerce, appreciate your continued support and advocacy for the commercial space industry. For over 30 years, OSC has worked to support and enable U.S. leadership in the commercial space economy. Over those years, we have partnered with industry to solve complex policy and export control issues, to open new markets, to encourage investment, minimize government competition with industry. Our office is currently the regulator of the U.S. commercial remote sensing industry, and we are implementing now the next generation of space situational awareness program. The U.S. commercial sector is a driver of our economy and underpins our national security, prosperity, and leadership. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the U.S. space economy accounted for more than $211 billion in 2021 and employed over 360,000 Americans. To ensure continued U.S. space leadership, the government needs a regulatory system that can support the dynamic and evolving commercial sector. We believe the administration's legislative proposal, developed with DOT, DoD, NASA, and the rest of our interagency partners, is the right vehicle for addressing this change. U.S. space regulatory responsibilities are currently shared across multiple agencies. Most rules were put in place prior to the recent surge in commercial activity. As more novel space activities are tested, flown, and operated, uncertainty about how such activities will be regulated could negatively affect both investor confidence and space safety. We support the legislative proposal recently released by the White House. We are confident it will create a modern, flexible regulatory system that protects vital U.S. interests, responds to industry needs, and ensures continued compliance with international obligations. The proposal would, without perturbing existing authorities, establish a regulatory framework designed to cover anticipated new technologies while providing the flexibility to respond to those that we cannot envision today. OSC is ready to rise to the challenge, and our recent remote sensing regulatory streamlining demonstrates how we would manage new responsibilities. This year alone, we've taken actions which have relieved our licensees of over 70 burdensome restrictions, while simultaneously protecting national security and the foreign policy interests of the United States. Beyond a supportive regulatory framework, a robust civil space situational awareness, or SSA, capability is essential for safety and vitality of the space sector. Commercial space companies have launched thousands of new satellites over the past few years, and their plans to launch tens of thousands more in the upcoming years. As orbits become increasingly congested, there is a need to better track space objects and deconflict traffic. Space Policy Directive 3 assigned us the responsibility for providing a future SSA service. OSC intends to provide these services globally to commercial and civil space operators, offloading those responsibilities from DoD so that DoD can focus on its core mission. TRACS, the name of our program, Traffic Coordination System in Space, will provide basic satellite tracking data and associated products free of direct user fees to support the sustained growth of civil and commercial space activities. Although TRACS received significant funding in 2023, we lack a specific congressional authorization for the program. The White House proposal would provide such authorities and help us engage international partners in our SSA and space traffic coordination. Over the last year, we've made good progress on the TRACS program, hiring key staff and beginning acquisition of commercial infrastructure necessary for the operational safety system. We've entered into formal agreements with DoD and NASA on data sharing and the future of SSA technology, and we will soon initiate a series of Pathfinder programs that will engage the commercial sector to identify cutting-edge technologies and clarify global market pricing. In conclusion, OSC is expanding our activities in support of the U.S. industry to match the speed and scope of its growth. The administration's proposal addressing both space mission authorization and space situation awareness would give us the tools to effectively carry out these activities. We look forward to working with you and your staff to ensure a safe and sustainable space environment for all humanity.
Thank you, Mr. Dalbello. Our final witness is John Hill. Mr. Hill serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space and Missile Defense in the Department of Defense. He previously served as the Principal Director for Space Policy and has held a variety of assignments at the Department of Defense. Deputy Assistant Secretary Hill, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairs Cantwell and Sinema, Ranking Members Cruz and Schmidt, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, it's an honor to testify today here alongside my distinguished colleagues. Services delivered from space-based systems drive modern economies. The contributions of Earth observation systems, positioning, navigation, and timing systems, and satellite communications and data transport systems are essential to modern life. The same is true for national security. The National Defense Strategy highlights the indispensable contributions that these space systems make to the integrated ability of the joint force to defend the homeland, to deter strategic attacks against the United States, our allies and partners, and to deter aggression while being prepared to prevail in conflict when necessary. To an increasing extent, commercial space systems are contributing to these essential services, much the same as the commercial economy has supported defense needs across all sectors of the economy throughout our history. The Department of Defense is utilizing commercial services and benefiting from the competitive commercial market forces that are driving innovation in the space sector to an ever greater extent. The United States has led the way in exploring space and developing new markets for services delivered from space. Now, U.S. commercial industry is pursuing new opportunities to develop markets for services and manufacturing delivered in space. Services that can expand the potential for space exploration and for services delivered from space. The United States has also been a leader in establishing legal and regulatory frameworks for spectrum, space launch and reentry, and remote sensing that make our nation a highly attractive place for commercial space entrepreneurs and investors to do business, all to the benefit of our economy and our national security. So it is appropriate to consider what legal and regulatory framework updates may be required to enable these new forms of commercial space activities. The Department of Defense is not a regulatory agency, but we have a long history of cooperating with our civil regulatory agency partners to help them understand any national security dimensions of the decisions they may be making. We have also worked closely with these agencies to update regulations so that the national security considerations reflect up-to-date considerations of risks and risk mitigation approaches. The recent rewrites of regulations for licensing commercial space launch services and private remote sensing space systems reflect this partnership. The administration's legislative proposal on authorization and supervision of novel private sector space activities likewise continues this approach by requiring consultation with the Secretary of Defense concerning matters of national security. And to be very clear, often the overriding national security consideration is to enable the competitiveness of U.S. industry without burdensome licensing conditions, while managing any risks of a given activity through other means available to the Department and our partners across the national security community. Finally, the administration's proposal includes important authorities by which the Department of Commerce will be able to conduct a number of inherently civil space situational awareness functions currently handled in the Department of Defense. The transition of these functions to a civil agency will enable the Department of Defense to focus our work on the inherently military aspects of the space situational awareness and space domain awareness missions. The Department of Defense has worked together with our interagency partners to craft the administration's legislative proposal. That proposal accounts for our national security concerns, including concerns for sustaining a space environment that enables national security space operations. It likewise accounts for U.S. treaty obligations and broader national interests. We urge your support, and thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you all for being here. And the Chair, Cantwell, will be back. She wanted to make sure that I said that. She's goes from one fire emergency to the next. Let's start the questioning. I'll start with you, Mr. Dalbello. Colorado is a leader in the aerospace economies and is going to rely on efficient, thorough, reliable approvals from the federal government to be able to do the innovations necessary to succeed in space. We're working on to introduce bipartisan legislation to create a modern mission authorization that will allow large and small companies to have regulatory certainty for how their activities will be reviewed and be able to maintain our obligations to our international partners and maintain levels of safety. This will ensure U.S. remains a global leader in space. Mr. Dalbello, if authorized by Congress, how will the Office of Space Commerce prepare its resources and personnel to authorize novel in-space activities on a thorough and timely basis?
Thank you very much for that question. Absolutely, one of the first things we do would be to engage. This is broad allocation of authority that we're seeking in our legislative package. And the first step to implement that would, of course, be to engage in a regulatory review process, which would involve the commercial sector. So first of all, we would do this in partnership. Secondly, we'd seek those things. I think you mentioned most of them. One is clarity of purpose. The private sector needs to understand what are the government objectives that we are pursuing. The second is there should be strict timelines. The private sector needs to know what does the license process look like, how long is it going to take. And then finally, the process needs to have flexibility. Recently, as I mentioned in my oral testimony, we actually reduced the restrictions on remote sensing industry licensees this year. We did that because we have written into our regulations as the global environment changes, as technologies advance, we have to have a regulatory system that's responsive so that the private sector isn't burdened with old and unnecessary regulations. So we would seek to take the same approach, engagement with industry, engagement with our colleagues in Congress, and we would move forward and put together a regulatory system that met those requirements.
Great, a system that evolves and innovates as it goes. What a concept. Ms. Melroy, for innovation to truly flourish, small businesses need an opportunity to compete with larger players in the arena, which have historically been awarded to the large contracts. Administrator Melroy, in your testimony, you discussed NASA's role as a purchaser of services from the commercial sector. How can smaller businesses enhance NASA's future through the NASA Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs to effectively compete for the open contracts in this burgeoning space economy?
Senator, thanks for asking a topic that I'm very interested in. I do believe that small businesses are the backbone of our country economically, but also bring the kind of innovation that we need for the mission that we have. We're very excited to say that we have raised the amount of money that we have awarded to small businesses by hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 5 years or so. And SBIRs and STTRs, as you pointed out, are a key part of that. One of the great examples comes from the state of Colorado, and that's Advanced Space, who developed the Capstone mission, which is even now exploring the novel near rectilinear halo orbit around the moon in preparation for future human spaceflight activities there to help us understand that orbit better so that we can be more efficient and we operate. And that started under an SBIR in 2015.
Absolutely. Mr. Coleman, Administrator Coleman, your testimony highlights FAA's responsibility for facilitating commercial space launches and re-entries by the private sector. FAA has seen a 186% increase in license applications since fiscal year 2020. Because of the FAA's work, every U.S. licensed launch or re-entry operation from spaceports has met, without exception, the highest levels of safety, despite the obviously unforgiving nature of the space environment. We introduced the Bipartisan Spaceport Act to provide dedicated support for infrastructure needs at U.S. spaceports such as Colorado Air and Spaceport. How does the FAA support the infrastructure needs of emerging spaceports around the country to continue with licensing along with prioritizing safety?
Thank you for the question, Senator Hickenlooper. In 2018, as a result of the Reauthorization Act for the FAA, we did stand up an Office of Spaceports, which supports the infrastructure needs of our 14 licensed spaceports in the U.S. We work very closely with those spaceports to address policy concerns, funding concerns, other issues that are of interest to those spaceports. And so we've worked very closely with those spaceports in that regard. We also have authorization for a spaceport infrastructure matching grants program, if you will. We've had that authority for some years now. We haven't had it appropriated, but we do have that authority in place to ensure that spaceports are being developed appropriately to support our launch service providers' needs.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to cut myself off, turn it over to the ranking member or vice chair, Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to try to go in kind of rapid fire because we only got 5 minutes and I have questions, but we did get a chance to visit some of us already. Deputy Administrator Melroy, I really appreciate your service. Is the only one here in the room, I think, that's been to space. Raise your hand if anybody else has. I think you're it. So thank you for your service. It's a very distinguished career. In my office, we talked about just how novel these in-person space activities are, and it just presents different realities. Like there's not a lot of data surrounding all of this right now as a regulatory framework is sort of being grappled with. Could you just talk a little bit about that with those human operations, how certification really does kind of depend on individual vehicles, right? I mean, could you just talk a little bit about that, amplify that a little bit?
Hey, thank you, Senator. Yeah, I really enjoyed our discussion on this. And yes, it does give you a novel perspective. Being in space, I think it's where everything comes together and you actually see how it all works. And actually, NASA has more than 50 years of human spaceflight experience doing things like satellite servicing, building the International Space Station, servicing Hubble, and so forth, using humans. We have new technologies that we're seeing autonomous, but of course the human spaceflight expertise is core with us. So I think one of the areas that we're interested in, we have worked very successfully with the FAA over the last decade on commercial crew. We have come to clarity. We need to protect our astronauts. We would expect any regulator to worry about public safety and to set a threshold and a bar, a performance-based bar. We go much further in protecting our astronauts, and we do that contractually today. And we have worked with our commercial providers to certify the vehicle for the operations that we do. It works very well for us because we have a spacecraft such as SpaceX's Crew Dragon that carries our astronauts to the International Space Station and back. And that we have a long history of how to certify a spacecraft.
And do you think that sort of inures to the benefit of the validity of a learning period kind of approach to all this? Would you agree?
Well, NASA thinks that it is, we would prefer not to extend the learning period, and I'll tell you why. Although we certify these vehicles for NASA operations, we are concerned that spaceflight participants believe that NASA is certifying the safety for their activities as well. And that is not something that we do. We have concerns about that misunderstanding.
Okay, thank you. We can follow up and talk more about that. Associate Administrator Coleman, I do want to ask, can you explain how the White House proposal will be different when the existing FAA regimes that we currently have already sort of struggle to meet statutory timelines? I mean, that's one big concern. So it's a FAA, you know, we want to be very supportive, but it currently struggles with some of those timelines. Could you explain how this would be any different than that?
Sure, thank you for the question, Senator. Certainly with launch licensing, it's a very intense process whereby a number of factors come into play. The complexity of the operation, the familiarity with the applicant with the rules, familiarity with the regulator, with the operation that's being proposed, the quality of the application itself, whether or not the evidence is sufficient enough to demonstrate compliance is there. These are factors that lend itself to the pace at which licensing occurs. These activities that we're talking about for in-space transportation mission authorization are significantly different, if you will, from launch activities and reentry activities that pose an entirely different risk exposure to the public than these activities. You know, for launch or reentry, we rely on flight safety analysis, system safety analysis, trajectory analysis. We're not talking about these types of analyses for these novel in-space missions. They're quite different, and we envision a very light touch approach, very similar to what the Commerce Department would apply for in-space missions that they would oversee.
Okay, thank you. And I had one final question before I run out of time. Mr. Hill, as commercial demands grow beyond the capabilities of Vandenberg and Cape Canaveral, do you believe that the memorandum of agreement that you currently have should be expanded to include additional ranges for reentry operations?
I think we need to always be looking at the growth of where commercial is going and ensure that where the Defense Department can support these types of growth areas. So looking at the MOU to see whether that is current or needs to be updated is appropriate as well. Because there are spaceports going around the country. There's also increasing growth at the DoD facilities. And as I said in his opening statement, fundamentally that's good for the nation and fundamentally it's good for us. We just have to figure out how to accommodate those things.
Okay. Thank you. Yield back. Thank you.
Great. And I will continue the questioning. I thought maybe that was the chair coming in. Mr. Hill, I didn't get a chance to ask you a question. As you're no doubt aware, the International Traffic in Arms regulations, or ITAR as it's commonly referred to, sets strict requirements for the United States in terms of the export of defense-related articles and services. ITAR requirements can significantly impact the space industry and could have a chilling effect on our ability to be, let's say, a partner of choice for allied or friendly countries that are seeking to expand their space programs using U.S. commercial technologies. While the State Department obviously has ultimate authority about what ends up on the munitions list, DoD's Defense Technology Security Administration, DTSA, is a lead reviewer and coordinator for potential changes. Can you speak a little to what updates to current export policy might help bolster competitiveness of U.S. space startups seeking to export their technology to allies or allied partner nations?
Thank you, Senator Hickenlooper. One of my close colleagues is the Director of the Defense Technology Security Administration, so while it's not in my particular area, we do consult because I have an interest from a space policy perspective. And a number of years ago, the United States government moved many items off of the International Traffic in Arms Regulation to the Commerce Department, Commerce Control List, moving them out of the classification of arms into more regular commerce types of export items. And that's been a regular review process that is ongoing and that they do every year or two to see how has the world changed, the economy changed. Because what we want to focus the ITAR on are those things that are truly the most concern from a munitions perspective, and recognizing that space technology is moving very fast. And what is special military today could be commodity tomorrow. And we need to stay ahead of the pace, and so that we don't constrain U.S. industry's competitiveness by regulatory lag. So that effort's been going on a couple of years. While I can't speak to specifics that might be moving, I know that is a regular focus of both State Department and the Defense Technology Security Administration.
Yeah. No, I think it's just going to grow. It will increasingly become a point of contention and debate. I think I'd start with Ms. Melroy, and we'll go down the list. We've talked a lot in this subcommittee about space debris over the years, and there are a number of bills that are in process or have passed. What's your sense in terms of, we've got the Wild West out there. There have been very few restrictions or regulations. There is an enormous amount of debris already out there, traveling at speeds that are hard for us, standing stably on the planet Earth, hard for us to conceive of how fast these sometimes very small fragments can do enormous damage at such high speeds. Anyway, what's your sense of what the Congress should be looking at and how we should approach this, and what level of urgency should we have?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Hickenlooper, and thank you for your leadership on this topic with the Orbits Act. I think it's critically important. I would say that it is universally realized that we have some real challenges in this area. I think the active debris remediation piece of it that you addressed is a critical piece. I actually think this legislative proposal is very helpful, specifically because it's looking at the safety of the space environment. And so that contains many more of the pieces that we want to be looking at. Orbital debris generation and remediation, but also other aspects of the space environment that the Department of Defense and NASA operate in. We think it's very important to address some of those other pieces as well. We are currently working on this, and we're proud of the work that we do in our orbital debris models, the help that we give industry about best practices, and we have a handbook and those kinds of things. But there's a lot more work to be done.
Well, I didn't see Senator Vance snuck in under my purview. So are you okay if they finish? Go ahead, Mr. Dalbello.
I just wanted to comment on the debris issue. That is why we're so focused at the Department of Commerce on the next generation of space situational awareness. We need better information about better and more timely information about what's in space. We need to make more reliable warnings available to the commercial sector. We need to have a plan all around the world. As I've traveled, countries are developing their own SSA systems there's really no clear coordination between these systems, and it's unclear that the results of individual systems can be correlated in a way that's meaningful. So we have a task, an international task, to work together to figure out, number one, let's have the best system in the world, and number two, let's figure out how to engage globally to make sure that all actors in space are operating safely.
Great. Guys, to shift over, you don't need to, I don't see any burning desire to add to that. I'll move over to Senator Vance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the four of you for being here. I just wanted to sort of ask some questions, basically about, whether the new rule or the new proposal is unduly complicated. And so it's my understanding that under the administration's proposal, the responsibilities for authorizing, licensing, and supervising commercial space missions would be split between DOT and the Department of Commerce. Now, can you help me understand whether a mission will need authorization from the Department of Transportation or Commerce? Maybe Mr. Dalbello and Mr. Coleman, when will something fall under Commerce's purview? When will it fall under Transportation's?
Sure, thank you for the question, Senator. So there are two specific carve-outs in the proposal for the Department of Transportation. Activities that involve a human being are responsibilities that will rest with the Department of Transportation.
Yeah.
Activities that involve the transport of goods in space also will reside with the Department of Transportation. If the sole purpose of the operation or activity is for transportation, and there are a few of those activities would rest with the Department of Transportation. All other activities would rest with the Department of Commerce. And so what we have is a construct whereby for a single activity, only a single agency will have oversight of that responsibility. There is no situation in which both the Department of Commerce and the Department of Transportation will have joint oversight responsibilities for a single activity.
So and just to follow up there, and Mr. Dalbello or any of you can feel free to jump in here. So let me just sort of toss out this hypothetical and explain to me what I'm missing, or if I'm right, we can sort of go from there. So let's say I have an in-orbit servicing mission that might need to dock at a commercial space station for refueling or some other purpose. Now, under the proposals, I understand it. The in-orbit servicing mission would be licensed by Commerce, but then the commercial space mission or the commercial space station is licensed by the Department of Transportation. So I guess, would I as an operator need multiple licenses from each agency in order to do this particular mission?
One of the things, that's a great question, and we've been asked that question previously, I think. It's a great question because if, as Kelvin said, if it involves humans, the space station would be licensed by the Department of Transportation. So if it were a space tug or a refueling station, it would be licensed by the Department of Commerce. In the business of refueling or a space tug would be a Commerce license. So even if there were, in your scenario, I think, a tug docks with the station, perhaps to refuel the station, the two licenses would be separate in that case. The activity of the station would be licensed by DOT, but the activity of a tug service, of which the station might be one of many customers, would be a Department of Commerce license.
So was there any discussion, or has there been discussion for when you have a scenario like this, and understand this is probably somewhat unusual, but not that unusual, where you have a scenario where you'd have to go to both Transportation and Commerce to just sort of basically give one agency jurisdictional control, so you don't sort of confuse, you don't have multiple people going to different places. I wonder, are there jurisdictional disputes where you might have Commerce and Transportation fighting over where you draw the line? I just worry that as commercial space aviation or space flight becomes more complex, that you might create jurisdictional issues where maybe some other approach might just make it more simple.
I think central to any of the scenarios we're talking about, There will be a robust interagency process that will be stood up along with these things. We do this now. I mean, our regulations in commercial remote sensing are really done. We're very tightly linked with the national security community on what we do. And I know that Kelvin, in his launch licenses, has a payload review that it's broadly reviewed in the interagency process. So where there's a jump ball like that, often there will be an interagency discussion. And that's why I said it's really important for any rule set to come with strict timelines, because you have to be able to, as the commercial sector has an expectation that they can get an answer in a reasonable timeline. So strict guidelines, strict timelines are important to move those processes along. Sometimes you have to talk to your interagency partners, but that process also has to have momentum behind it to meet the needs of the commercial sector.
Sure. So thank you all. I'm mindful of my time here, so I'll yield back with just one final comment. I guess as this stuff unfolds and as we actually see how this provision plays out in the real world, just the one request is that if you see these sort of jump ball situations coming up and they're unduly complicated for the commercial space industry, maybe we can figure out ways to simplify them. That's just one big worry that I have with these things, is that these like weird jurisdictional jump ball issues, as you put it, might come up more than we'd like. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vance. Ranking Member Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to each of the witnesses today. Good to see you. I want to start with Mr. Coleman and Mr. Hill. Thank you for being here. It was great to see Starship finally succeed in conducting its second test flight just a few weeks ago. This was, of course, after months of delay stemming from bureaucratic red tape from AST, Fish and Wildlife, and other agencies injecting themselves into the process. An environmental review had been approved for the first launch of Starship, but simply because SpaceX must continue new test launches, they were required to go through a whole new environmental review process. To your knowledge, does China apply its own version of environmental policy review equivalent to a National Environmental Policy Act, under which Chinese citizens, or perhaps a bat conservation group, can sue the CCP and halt missile or space vehicle development? And what about Russia? Does Russia do that?
Thank you for your question, Senator Cruz. The first SpaceX launch that you mentioned, Orbital Flight Test 1, did result in a mishap whereby the pad was destroyed. For the second flight, they had to repair the pad, and as such, due to that change, it required a new look at the environmental piece to ensure compliance with NEPA and to ensure compliance with the Environmental Species Act, which required a consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we conducted that consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service in accordance with U.S. law. To your second question about China and their programs, I'm not as familiar with what China does there, but I can tell you with surety that we follow U.S. law and procedure in our environmental review process associated with the second launch of Starship.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cruz. I'm not familiar with the Chinese legal structure, but I know enough to say I wouldn't find it as a good model for us.
Well, look, I've been to that pad where the launch occurred, and I'll tell you the answer is no. In China, you cannot do that. You don't have those suits. In Russia, the answer is no. Let me ask you this. When China or Russia undertakes a national space mission, do either of them wait for months to go through litigation with their domestic versions of Earth Justice or the Center for Biological Diversity?
I'm not certain or aware of what Russia and China does in those scenarios, Senator.
To my knowledge, they do not do those things, sir. I think that's part of the value of our system, though, is the openness that we have.
So with all due respect, it's not the value of our system to have asinine delays that accomplish nothing and that put us at a disadvantage compared to our competitors, and we are in a race for space. Now understand, I'm not advocating for a wholesale repeal of our environmental laws or NEPA. I'm just arguing for them not to be applied in a dumbass way that slows down commercial space. And under the current status quo, with agencies giving the opportunity for third-party lawsuits to derail commercial space development, that is slowing down our effectiveness. Do you think that makes sense? Is the current system broken? Or should the United States treat commercial space sector as advancing our national interests?
Thanks for the question, Senator. I certainly believe that the U.S. commercial space sector does, in fact, advance our national interests in many ways. We understand the benefits that commercial space plays to our national security, as well as our civil space exploration interests. And so we work very closely with our partners, NASA and the Defense Department, to ensure that we have timely, accurate, precise licensing reviews for these very critical programs, and we'll continue to do that moving forward.
Senator, we are enabling commercial launch in this country and commercial space in this country from our perspective in the Defense Department because it benefits us in the Defense Department. We leverage that, as I noted in my opening statement. And I think commercial firms are finding this to be the attractive place to invest, even though we do have this regulatory processes of ours. And so I think we should continue to ensure this remains the environment where companies want to put their money to work.
Well, I think you're right that we need to work to ensure that, and that means that there should be a mandate for streamlining the process so it actually is sensible rather than being counterproductive. Deputy Administrator Melroy, let me turn to you. Thank you for your many years of service, both to the Air Force and now NASA. In our last hearing, former NASA Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations, Bill Gerstenmaier, noted how the slow licensing process is causing scheduling delays for Starship and, consequently, the Artemis lunar landing mission. HLSHE said, these delays, quote, simply would not be acceptable if he were at NASA. Do you think the regulatory delays that impede programs of national interest like Artemis are acceptable? And put another way, does the current regulatory framework for commercial space move fast enough or provide enough flexibility to allow a company to iterate a vehicle for a mission of national interest?
Thank you, Senator, and may I just say thank you for your support of all of our Texas activities that we do and your support of NASA. It's been incredible through the years, and we appreciate it. Of course, we are vitally interested in the success of our commercial partners, as I've brought up. In preparation, I actually contacted the program manager and asked, do you think our partners are slowing us down? And was told no. I think the complexity that we're seeing is there's a lot of new stuff happening, and there are some new players who are trying to work within their statutory deadlines, but are very unfamiliar with this kind of activity. So there has been a learning period. I don't refer to the FAA, who understands their business very well, but some of their environmental partners who are learning along the way. I can assure you that NASA works very closely with those regulatory partners, and that they have signaled that they are aware of the critical nature of the Artemis program and how important its success is to the nation.
Thank you.
Chair Cantwell.
Thank you so much. Thank you for holding this important hearing. I thank you and Senator Schmidt for stewarding this panel and for the panelists being here today. I really want to focus on technology in general and technology risks. And I know you guys represent different viewpoints, particularly from the agency side. But I would hope that you might be able to quickly just, and then for the record, if necessary, give us a more detailed answer. What do you think are the technology risks with space commercialization? This committee played a very big role in a new certification program for the FAA, trying to correct what we thought were some shortages both in workforce and in redundancy issues. But how do you see the commercial space challenge, and what do you think are the technological challenges that we really need to focus on from a safety perspective? We in the Northwest are very proud of the Fort $0.6 billion space industry. That's to our economy and 13,000 jobs. But we want to get the next phase right, too. And so how would you characterize those technological challenges from a safety perspective? And anyone who wants to, if you want to start, Mr.
I'd be happy to start. I think, again, we're seeing a use of space at a pace that is surprising, even to those of us who are veterans. And as we see the fleets of commercial satellites in particular move into the single and then double-digit thousands, again, what our focus of the Department of Commerce is on the space situational awareness and putting in place a next-generation way to track space objects. Again, one of the issues that we have is it's not just the United States. The Chinese have announced a mega constellation they want to launch. I suspect we'll see similar activities in Europe. So we could see the number of satellites being launched in the tens of thousands. So the technical challenge is the systems we have today aren't sufficient to do the level of exquisite SSA that we need. We need to be consistently excellent at something today that we're only good at.
And
so
you're not just talking about the debris side of the equation. You're talking about the communication interference, I would guess, and other.
I'm talking about the actual physical objects in space. When you get tens of thousands of objects in low Earth orbit together with human spaceflight, it is a potentially volatile
So
situation.
you'd say number one issue, LEOs.
From my perspective, that is the
Okay.
number one issue.
Okay. Mr. Coleman?
Senator Cantwell, thanks for the question. I think as we see more commercial space launch activities take place, particularly in the National Aerospace System, we're significantly challenged to accommodate the number of launches alongside the commercial aviation activities that we're seeing. We've been addressing that through procedural changes, policy changes, and also we're trying to address it through technological changes as well. We're looking to implement and stand up new tools like Space Data Integrator that will help us better understand what a vehicle's health is, where it is in the system, et cetera. But we need to advance those efforts to better manage the proliferation of space activities that we're now seeing in the National Aerospace System, for sure.
Mr. Hill, did you want to jump in there?
Certainly, if I could pick up on what Mr. Dalbello was discussing, as the volume of space vehicles grows exponentially in space, the challenge is incorporating into the space surveillance networks, government, commercial, and others, and the data fusion that you need to do to keep track of where all of this is. This is why, one of the reasons why we're saying this is not a traditional Defense Department mission. That's more classic civil agency type of mission. Our focus is on particular satellites that might be of a threatening nature. The challenge we really have here with the commercial is simply orbital dynamics. And certainly technology will allow more autonomous control, more carrying capacity in low Earth orbit, but staying pace with that will be one of the big challenges from a safety perspective.
So you would say autonomous capacity maybe number one, or no?
I think we probably don't know what the ultimate capacity is as the technology to actually manage it grows, but keeping pace with that and understanding
I'm pretty sure our delivery system of all that equipment and freight to the moon is going to be autonomous, isn't it? Isn't it, Ms. Melroy?
That's correct, Chair. There will be humans on the loop, but many of the activities have a time delay as well.
Yeah. Well, did you have something you wanted to put into?
Yes, I did. In the remaining, it's very difficult to narrow it down. I agree with my colleague about space domain awareness, not just for collision avoidance, but also for accountability for things like rendezvous and proximity operations and the safety and the accountability for those actions. We believe that understanding the explosive potential of new propellants is important, such as the current methane systems. We're working closely with industry and with the FAA to define that for the safety of our operations as well as commercial. I'll add technology that enables spectrum sharing, and I'm sure the Department of Defense could talk more about that because they have a lot of programs in that area. In addition to that, we believe that it's vital to do continued research on nuclear power and propulsion to enable deep space capabilities, but we want to do it safely.
Thank you so much. What I'd like to do is just have you expand for the record what you think the top 3 issues are. You've kind of achieved that, Ms. Melroy, but for the record, if you could do that. If you want to add 5 or 6 other things, great. It's more, I think part of our challenge going forward on how to look at this is really understanding what are the technological challenges and workforce challenges in the context of even what is proper oversight. But until you really understand what the technology challenges are, you really can't decide whether you have the kind of technology support and oversight that you need. And as people discuss, is commerce a place to be? Is FAA a place to be? And how do we coordinate between various agencies? And obviously, Mr. Hill, the spectrum issue in and of itself is pretty big, and Ms. Melroy talked about it. So it's really a question of how do all of these things come together? And you all basically, Ms. Melroy may not have said the word pace, but everybody is talking about the rapid deployment here of next generation technology, and how does the government even stay pace with that? And what does it take for us to have the right people, the right dialogues, the right information? So anyway, I'll look forward to your written answers to those questions too. And thank you so much for the hearing.
And thank all of you. We appreciate your taking the time. We know that you're in busy jobs. Somebody was saying the other day, Senator King was talking about when you get up to certain levels, you get to the highest level where people still know exactly what they're doing. I think you're all at that level. The hearing record is going to remain open for 4 weeks until January 10th, 2024. Any senators that would like to submit questions for the record should do so 2 weeks from now at the latest, by December 27th. We ask the responses be returned to the committee by January 10th, wherever possible. Thank you, and again, that concludes today's hearing. We stand adjourned.